Hey folks, Gene Galin here with the Chatham Journal. I'm with Joanna Jacobs. She's our special guest today. And before we go, if folks have watched us before, no, we just need to make sure all the channels are hooked up. We're sending data to Facebook, X, and YouTube. Okay, our X channel is streaming. Facebook is streaming, and we're just waiting for YouTube. And YouTube is streaming. So we're ready to start. All right, we're going to enact that, hit the go button, and then uh, we're going to be talking to Joanna Jacobs, and she's a longtime educate. I will say, I think it's educational writer, and she's had a long history of experience. And I love her website, joannajacobs.com. So let me just hide that and introduce you folks to Joanna Jacobs. She's on the. She's. Am I allowed to tell folks you're visiting your grandbaby, or is that kind of high
Oh, well,
secret?
actually, I'm back home now. I was in Austin visiting, and they had a huge, huge thunderstorm, and we lost power for 2 days. So that was fun.
Ooh.
And,
So.
and they say, well, Austin's hot, but everybody has air conditioning. Well, not if there's no electricity.
Oh, that's true. Before we start, can I ask you this question? What's your grandma name?
It's just Grandma Joanne, but
Okay.
it's more complicated because I have step grandchildren, and there I'm Nana Joanne. So I have two.
Well, no, the reason I ask is because I find that sometimes grandmas from the two sides of the family have disputes as to who's going to be grandma and who's going to be nana or whatever. So anyway, let's get into the topic. If you folks visit JoanneJacobs.com site, you'll see a gathering of her writings. And the reason I find it very interesting is because back in February, I asked Joanne for permission to run one of her articles on the Chatham Journal website, and she did let us do that. And she continues to write. And I think the interesting thing is for folks here in Chatham County, schools have started implementing last year the no iPhones or no phones or no technology in a student's hands while they're in school. And Miss Joanne's been covering this for years. So we started talking about this, and you were telling me about how the process is working and some of the things that are good and bad, and parents' concerns and everything else. So I'll let you take it over from here.
Okay, well, I'd say there's been a national movement. A guy named John Haidt has been very influential in this, where the teachers say students are distracted, they're not paying attention. And every school that has banned phones, I think, says things are much better when students don't have phones. Uh, they can pay attention, but there are different ways to ban phones. And the least effective way is to have every teacher enforce their own policy, because that means teachers have to spend all these time saying, put away your phones, put away your phones. Um, and teachers don't like that. What they want is for the school to say, either you turn in your phone at the beginning of the day. If we catch you with a phone, you go to the principal's office and maybe they take the phone away, they call home, there are consequences. So the teachers don't have to do it. Many schools are going to a company called Yonder, makes this little pouch. You make everyone put their phone in the pouch, and it can't be opened except with a special magnet. So at the end of the day, they open up your pouch. Um, and But it needs to be a whole school policy. It needs to be enforced. And if it is, students start paying attention to the teacher. They communicate, they socialize. And some schools will let you have your phones during lunch. But I think the most successful schools say, you're in lunch, talk with your classmates, don't be staring at your phone. And I have just seen overwhelmingly, when it's a whole school policy, teachers and principals say this is wonderful. The other thing that happens with phones is in some schools kids arrange fights, and they say, oh, so and so is going to fight so and so. And when you take away the phones, a lot of those fights never happen. And everyone wants to have the photos, so you never see. Well, I suppose you don't see it if it's not film, but and so the whole thing of oh, I'm going to share how tough I am, and it's going to go online. If nobody has a phone, a lot of that disorder just it doesn't happen. So I think this, you see it spreading, and I think it will become the norm very, very quickly. The only people who don't like it are some parents who are so worried that something horrible will happen at school and they won't be able to get in touch with their kids. And I feel sympathetic to them because, you know, very occasionally horrible things do happen in schools. But I really think that, you know, in a crisis, do you want your kid on the phone or you want your kid evacuating? I mean, it that concern is just should not outweigh the enormous advantages of not having a bunch of, because kids are much more distracted now than they used to be. And back in the day, we were not always paying attention. Um, so I think this is happening, and there's just overwhelming evidence that it's better than letting everybody have their little entertainment device that's constantly rewarding you for paying attention. And um, most people's phones are more interesting than their algebra teacher.
Let me ask you this question. In your article, one of the articles that you had put out, you mentioned Yonder, and you said the issue with Yonder, and let me ask you this question, and then you could follow up with what schools are finding as a better solution. You said a lot of kids will find ways around it. I think you gave an example of someone who bought a magnet on Amazon and was actually, I think he paid like $50 or so, and then he was selling that as a service where he would unlock your Yonder packet. So can you give us a little bit more information as to the problems with using Yonder and what schools are finding as a better solution to doing that?
Well, it's not just Yonder. The kids can be very, very creative. So the number one thing kids do is that they have an old phone and they walk in the door, they give the old phone and they keep the new phone. And the only way you deal with that is that every time you see a kid with a phone, it gets reported, it goes to the office, and the phone is confiscated. And if so, you have to have enforcement, and if you do, then kids say, I lost my phone. Um, but yeah, kids will find ways to get around it, and that's why it has to be whole school. The administration has to enforce it. You cannot leave it to the individual teacher to be the phone cop, because it's too much. They've got a lot of other things to do. They can't do that. And just in general, I think one of the things that teachers complain about constantly is that they are not backed up by the administration in enforcing discipline. And they send a kid to the office and he comes back with a snack. So the theory is, oh, it's like the Snickers commercials. He's grumpy because he's hungry. And then people say, oh, if I get in trouble, I get a snack. And so that's, you need to have administrators enforcing policies or it doesn't work.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mentioned that because they did a school survey here a few years ago in Chatham County, and I think it was the number 2 and number 3 issue with teachers was the fact that the lack of discipline and proper follow-up by the administrators as to taking care of that situation. Now, when you mentioned the whole school policy, is in that example, are kids just dropping their phones in a box or something as they're coming into school, or at what point are the phones taken away, or at what point do the students put those phones away?
Typically, I mean, schools have different ways of doing it, but often they walk in the door, hand over the phone, it's put in a box. Sometimes some schools have boxes in the classroom, but you know, it varies. But I've seen teachers say, just lock up the phone. If they're carrying it around in a pouch, some kids, I mean, you can take a high quality scissors and cut into the pouch. Of course, someone will notice, but kids find a way to defeat almost anything. But if it's not, maybe it's not 100% perfect. But if 90% of the kids aren't on their phones, the 10% don't have anybody to be exchanging messages with. It can schools that They enforce the rules. Things get a heck of a lot better, and I think it's um, very worth it for schools um, to do this. And I think um, the other step that people are talking about is, well, you took away their phones, but you gave them all laptops, and there's a lot of abuse of um, laptops and tablets in the classroom. And some teachers are saying, for some things, it's really convenient to have that tablet or laptop, that internet connected device for teaching, but the risk of the student being distracted is so high, I'd rather just get rid of them and go back to, old-fashioned teaching. Kids, schools try to have filters so you can't access, say, porn, and students are very creative. If they turned that creativity to academics, they'd all be taking calculus in 8th grade. But um, there are a lot of students entertaining themselves with the laptops and tablets that are supposed to be educational.
I think in one of your articles, you mentioned that a teacher had done as an assignment where he or she had asked the students to track how much on-screen time they were using on the weekend. And I think the example you provided, there was one student who spent 17 hours on her phone on a Sunday because she pretty much had nothing else to do. And I'm old enough to remember where my mom would just say, "Go outside and play." You weren't allowed to hang around in the house well, we didn't have iPhones back then.
Yeah, when I was a kid, people didn't own their own phones. The phone company owned your phone, and you rented your phone from the phone company. And the idea when we first you could buy your own phones, it was like, and I'm talking about landlines. It was so exciting. Yeah, there are kids who spent an enormous amount of time online and also an enormous amount of time not moving. Um, the pandemic, I would say almost anything you could mention, you could say, well, it was a problem before, but the pandemic made it worse. That applies to many, many things. Um, Kids are not outside as much. They're not interacting face to face with friends as much. Um, and some kids escape from the world. Um, they have problems with anxiety or social skills, and they live entirely online. And I think that's very bad for kids. So there's a movement in addition to getting phones out of schools. There's another movement to say to parents, limit your kids' screen time, delay uh, giving them a phone at home, uh, keep them off of social media until high school, and um, and make them go outside and play.
Yeah, I think you actually had an article, How a Health Crisis Became an Educational Crisis, where you covered some of those things. Uh, how'd you get interested in this particular field of reporting and writing? Because you've had a long history of being a news reporter, news editor. You've been a jacket of all trades. What kind of drew your attention to concentrate on this particular field of interest for you?
Well, when I was in 2nd grade, my best friend and I were uh, looking at the Weekly Reader, and we decided it was dumb and we could do better. So it was happened to be a Wednesday. So we decided to do a newspaper. We called it the Wednesday Report. And then I went home for dinner. And my dad said, "What'd you do today?" And I said, "Oh, Janice and I did a newspaper." And he got very excited. And I didn't realize that my father's father had been a police reporter in Omaha and a courts reporter. Um, and in fact, there were 5 Jacobs brothers, and they all worked. There happened to be 3 Omaha newspapers, and they were all every Omaha newspaper had a Jacobs brother working for them. So I didn't realize I had come from this newspaper tradition. So my dad brought home a Mimeo machine from work, and Janice and I put out the Wednesday Report for 4 years, all through elementary school. So I started kind of young. We were co-editors in chief. I started at the top. And in high school, I worked for the high school newspaper and the yearbook and the literary magazine. And in college, I worked for the newspaper. And I remember being extremely excited when I read a biography of Nellie Bly. And when I grew up, girls couldn't do a lot of professions. And when I realized that girls could be reporters, I was very excited. And that was my goal, since kind of almost as long as I can remember. And um, when I got into reporting, of course, you do everything. But I I kind of lucked into a job on the editorial pages of the San Jose Mercury News, and I was hired as a copy editor and letters editor. And when I wanted to write more, and so I talked my boss into letting me write a column. And when I started, my daughter was a baby, and as she grew up, of course, I got more and more interested in education. And I also realized that I thought education was underreported. Um, at the newspaper, often the newest reporters might be assigned to cover schools. But when you got more experienced, you moved on to politics because it was more prestigious. Um, so I thought the education reporting wasn't great. Um, and that as a columnist, if I was sitting in San Jose writing about national politics, I wasn't really going to have much of an edge. But in education, um, I could you know, be well informed, and I had more of an edge. And there weren't that many women writing columns, so I could use, I was a mother, and so I did a lot of education and women's issues and family issues, and I did some politics too, because when you write a column twice a week, you don't want to exclude any possible topic. Um, and then I got to the point where I was thinking, well, what's my next step? And I decided to write a book about a startup charter school in San Jose. And so I left my job thinking that, oh, when I want to go back to newspapers, I have a reputation. I'll get hired, no problem. Not realizing the newspaper industry was about to crash. So returning to newspapers proved to be not viable. And I've been freelancing ever since and blogging. Yeah.
Yeah, and your blog in joannejacobs.com. Uh, yeah, I saw your article about charter schools, and unless you want to, do you have anything else you want to talk about technology in school, or you like to? I like to get into charter schools, mini charters. You also did one on let kindergarten be kindergarten. So I kind of, I guess, in the early stages of a student's life in school is what I like to move into. Unless you have something else to add about technology in schools.
No, I can move on.
All right. Why don't we start off with your book on charter schools the charter school startup in San Jose. Why did you decide, hey, I want to write a book about a charter school in San Jose?
Well, charter schools were fairly new then, and this was the first charter in San Jose. And to be honest, I didn't start with that charter. Um, I had another charter I was going to write about, which was brand new, and um, finally, the people that were doing it said, we can't allow you access because the teachers are very nervous and they don't really want to talk to you, and we feel like our teachers have enough to do without, making them any more stressed than they already are. So that was a little frustrating. But I had started volunteering at Downtown College Prep, which is the San Jose charter, just because I wanted to visit, spend time at a lot of different um, charters. And they were very open and willing to have me go to classes, go to their meetings, go to basically everything. They were remarkably open, um, and it took a lot longer to get the book published. But so by the time um, it, I spent so much time there that they graduated their first class, and I was able to include the graduation speech of one of their students in the book. I might add a graduation speech so good that I think the editor thought I had written it, because and I was like, no, she wrote it. I had absolutely nothing to do with it. Um, but I helped kids with their college applications, and you really, I got to see every facet um, of the school, and I was really interested in alternatives for families whose kids were not doing well in school. This school was designed basically for kids from Mexican immigrant families. Parents had very little education. Um, and in the traditional schools, um, these were kids who weren't doing well. And uh, and they were really not on track to finish high school. Now this was a while ago, and I think I think some things have changed in the attitudes of parents. It used to be that Mexican immigrant parents thought that finishing high school was nice, but it wasn't really essential. And particularly for boys, if your uncle had a roofing job and you were, a senior in high school, and you said, "No, I'm not going to work for my uncle. I want to finish school," you'd say, "You're kind of lazy. You're not very responsible. You don't want to contribute to the family." So dropping out was not, the act of somebody who was kind of apathetic. It was the act of somebody who was wants to help the family and earn money, and did not expect to need much education to be employed. So that has changed over the years. But I was interested because I saw some kids do well in public schools. My daughter, no problem at all. But other kids really struggle, and particularly with kids from low income families, parents don't have much education. I think there's a tendency to say, "Oh, they have so many problems. Well, he's a nice kid. He's doing well enough." Or if we get him to a diploma, even if the diploma is kind of meaningless, we've done our job. And schools often will brag about, "Oh, X% of our kids went to college." And I said, "Well, they told you that they were going to enroll in community college. Did they actually enroll? A semester later, are they still enrolled? Did they pass any classes?" And you have a lot of phony metrics in education. Graduation rates have become utterly meaningless, where you could sort of claim success, but not really know how your kids are doing when they hit the real world. This charter school was very focused on, I mean, the name was Downtown College Prep, and they discovered that a lot of their kids did very poorly in college. So they started offering a lot of college counseling to keep kids in school, keep them on track. Um, and then when their students started graduating from college, they realized they were having trouble finding professional jobs. And so they started to help them uh, understand how to network and how to move up from, working at the retail store to a job that might actually use your degree. It's very difficult to upward mobility is hard. It's very hard.
Yeah, you had mentioned that's where you start out with, and I saw a recent article, and I had not heard of this term before. I'm familiar with charter schools because my kid went to public schools and also went to a public charter school in Chatham County. We've got two Chatham
Mhm.
County charters, Chatham Charter and Woods Charter. You had mentioned micro schools. Can you tell people exactly what that is? Because I hadn't heard about it till I saw your article on that.
Well, during the pandemic, of course, a lot of parents were scrambling. What do we do? Remote schooling didn't work for lots of kids, and the younger the kid, the less likely it was to be effective. Um, and so people started homeschooling, and then they said, "Well, um, why don't I get together with my kids' friends and we'll combine our homeschools, and then the parents can trade off." And then people, so they call those pandemic pods. And then some people thought, well, why don't we just, get together three families or four families, and maybe somebody has some space in a house, or there's a church or a community center, and we'll form a little micro school. So uh, that worked for a lot of people. Maybe you all chip in money and you can afford to hire a retired teacher to run it, or a teacher who's been home raising kids. I mean, there's a lot of women out there with teaching degrees who are not currently teaching, particularly elementary teachers. And so people started forming these small micro schools. Some of them were, there's a company called Prenda that said, we'll sell you, we'll set up schools. We have a curriculum, an online curriculum. And so we don't need a teacher to run the school. We really need a mom who will make sure kids do their online stuff. And then we'll have them out in the backyard playing, working in the garden, going to the park and doing sports. Um, and so Prenda was able to do schools very cheaply because, you weren't paying a teacher's salary, you're paying a supervisor's salary. Um, and some of these became charters. It depends on, every state has different charter laws. Um, but parents said, this is kind of nice. My 6-year-old is with a mixed group of, 5 to 8-year-olds. They're all playing together. It's kind of like, the Waltons. And because it's so small, it's easier to focus on individual needs. The kid who can move much more quickly, the kid who needs to move more slowly. Um, and so for some families, when schools reopened, they said, I kind of like the pandemic pod or the micro school. So this became an option that, kind of, and there's a national micro school center, and they will give you a more official, but basically a micro school is a really small school. Most of them, they did a survey. Most micro schools now are led by somebody who is a former teacher or a former school staffer. Um, so most of them have some traditional education experience, but not all. Um, and some of them use online curriculum, some of them do not. Um, and that's something that's changed with homeschooling too, because homeschoolers used to write away and they'd get a curriculum in the mail, or they just do it all themselves. And now the resources to support you for homeschooling are enormous. Maybe not all good, but they're there. Um, so many more people are homeschooling. More people are sending their kids to these small micro schools, and education choice has kind of exploded. Um, and so many more states are providing what used to be called vouchers. Now they're now called education savings accounts. They basically give money to the parents and say, you decide. You can use it at a private school, a, a, a charter, a micro school, or you can use it to buy curriculum to support your homeschooling. And so I think we will see more and more people turn to these alternatives. I think we'll see more hybrids where a school district will say, we've got these homeschoolers and micro schoolers that could use a little more support. So we'll partner with them and we'll get some of the money, and maybe we'll do testing for them, or we'll do science labs, for them. And so they'll be partially homeschooled, partially, in our system. And that's better than losing them entirely.
Are you finding the reactions from traditional schools being kind of, as you just mentioned, proactive, or are there traditional schools that are pushing back, saying, "Hey, this micro school or charter school idea is not a good idea"? And what's driving the increase? I know that's increasing here. Charter schools in Chatham County and homes. I mean, not just Chatham County, but North Carolina, but also homeschooling.
Well, I would say that district school people vary all over the place. Many of them have pushed back for years. They feel like they're the experts. They know what they're doing. And, people come up with charter school ideas. I'm a charter school supporter, but not every idea is a good idea. Often they are ideas that may work for some kids but don't work for all kids. And that's fine if it's a school of choice. If you're a public school, you kind of have to deal with everybody who comes in the door. If you're a charter school, you can say, um, here's the way we're going to teach, and do you think this will work for your kid? There's a bunch of charters called um, basis schools. And actually, basis now has some charters and some private schools. And basis are very accelerated, very advanced. And if your kid is a high achiever and highly motivated, this could be perfect. If your child has problems in school, maybe not so motivated, it would be a nightmare. So, uh, not every school works for every kid, but some district people are, I think, looking to the future and saying we're in a system with a heck of a lot more choices for parents. So we need to compete for students either by saying we're better than these alternatives or by saying um, we will work with you and you be half day doing your thing and be half day using all our facilities, um, and we will help you be more successful. And I think there's a lot of potential for schools to work with the parents that way. They're not used to it, they're not really trained for it. But I, if I were talking to a young, a young administrator, I would say, look to the future. You don't have a captive audience. Many more, it used to be people with money could afford private school. But a lot of people who don't have much money but have access to an education savings account, a voucher, can make other choices. And so you don't have the captive audience you thought you had. And as I say, I've seen with when I kind of started out, you saw a lot of um, Black parents were very dissatisfied with their neighborhood schools and very open to the idea of charters because they were looking for alternatives. White suburban parents, much less so. They were much happier with their traditional schools. Hispanic parents tended to be not really in the choice movement because they sort of felt like this is so much better than what we had at home. Why should we complain? But over time, they became less satisfied with their neighborhood schools and much more open to looking for choices. And I think just generally in the population, you have a lot of parents who think they ought to have a choice, who are much more critical. And again, I think the pandemic, when schools closed, and particularly in places where they closed for a long time, they kind of broke faith with the parents. And they broke the habit of going to school every day. They told parents it doesn't matter if your kid is physically in school and you can't go back. You know.
Yeah, I know this is a subject we can, there's a lot of side roads we can take off of the subject. Folks, I just want to remind you, joannajacobs.com is where you can read the articles that Joanna puts up on her site. The one that other article that caught my attention, because again, I'm going to sound like an old guy, but I remember going to kindergarten and I think half the day you spent in the playground interacting, doing some kind of activity. Red Rover, or
Oh, I remember Red Rover.
yeah, there you go, or the naps. And you had an article called Let Kindergarten Be Kindergarten." And I think in that article you featured the book Why Boys Fail, and also you're against, not totally for, the idea of adding pre-K. You want to explain to people what your meaning or why you wrote Let Kindergarten Be Kindergarten. What are you seeing with the problems with kindergarten these days?
Well, again, this goes back a number of years. This is not a new thing, but over the last, well, 20 years, maybe more than that, we um, years ago somebody wrote, "Oh, kindergarten is the new first grade." When I started kindergarten, they didn't teach reading. They thought we weren't ready. They told the parents not to teach us to read because they might do it wrong. Now, I had a sister a year older, so she taught me, but my mother was faithful to what the school told us. And but they decided kindergartners should learn to read. And I, for a number of years, I was tutoring first graders in reading at a local school. And so I spent a lot of time in first grade classrooms, and I thought, this is insane. I mean, not it's not just that they moved the first grade curriculum to kindergarten and the second grade curriculum to first grade. I swear they were doing things that we did in third or fourth grade in first grade. And some kids are ready for it. Um, my daughter was a little freakish. She was reading when she was 2, but and she started kindergarten reading, Beezus and Ramona. That was I loved Beverly Cleary. Uh, and there was a number of kids who could read well, but there were kids who were really struggling. They weren't ready. And particularly, you could see that the boy who was the best student was about the level of the girl who was the worst student. Girls develop differently than boys. So there's been a big movement to either say, make kindergarten less academic, give kids more time to run around and play, and learn all the social skills that you know kids need to learn, um, or to start boys a year later. And in affluent areas, a lot of parents, what they call red shirt their sons, and just hold them back a year so that they'll be, more mature um, when they start. In fact, matter of fact, my daughter was born in February because my husband said he was born in January, and he said it was really an advantage for me to be older than the other boys. And I want, in case we have a boy, I want our kid to be born early in the year and be older than the average for the classroom. Um, my husband also knew a kid who'd been skipped. He was skipped 2 years, and he was much younger. And he said, "Oh, that poor kid! What a disaster." So people have been worried about this for years. But again, as kids more, spend more time staring at screens, they're less active at home. Um, you have kids who aren't very active at home, and they're not very active at school. And you have the distraction problem. It's hard for little kids to pay attention. So, you want to teach them to pay attention, but maybe slowly over time and be realistic about what a 5-year-old can do. I used to also volunteer in my daughter's classrooms, and I could see that. I remember an assignment, the teacher wrote an address on the board, and you were supposed to copy it down. You're supposed to write pen pals. And some kids would look at the address and write it down. They're done. Other kids, it's like they look at the address, they look down, oh, they've forgotten it. They look at it, and then they're like, I think I'll poke my neighbor. You know, I think I'll poke the other guy. And they did nothing, nothing. And I'm sitting there going, let's write the address. And they're like, they're little kids. They're little kids. Um, and we didn't used to ask kids to do so much desk work and academic work so young back in the day. So I think kids need much more movement at home and at school, and much more realistic expectations. And if we want to put everybody the same age in the same class, we need to have some kids be able to accelerate and some kids be able to move at a slower pace and not be considered failures or not see themselves as failures.
Let me ask you a question. I don't think I saw any writing on this, but I've shot sports from middle school to high school to college for over 25 years. And what I have found is that kids that participate in sports or extracurricular activities in school have a tendency to do better in school from an academic perspective and in life. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that is absolutely true. There's even research that says that's true. It's a little bit self selective because sometimes the kids who are doing really badly um, aren't doing well enough to participate in sports or to be in the band or to be in other activities. But but if your kid has any interest at all, I guess I would say get them into something where and schools spend a lot of time having kids do group projects on the theory that we need to learn to collaborate. And group projects are often artificial. The strongest student does all the work, and the other kids goof off. My daughter was a strong student, and I said, well, can't you get the other kids to contribute? She said, it's too much work. It's so much simpler to do it myself. So group projects, I think, are often, unless they're very well designed, not very effective. But a team, you're on the soccer team. You want to excel as an individual, but you got to work with the other players. And you learn the social skills, you learn about setting a goal, working to achieve, you know. Um, I think that team sports are terrific. Um, and Being in the band or the choir, I mean, anything where you're working with other people, you're in a play, you're working with other people, and it's not enough for you alone to do, to excel, but you have to do it with other people. And that's a terrific life skill. I think it helps kids in all sorts of ways. And also sports for some kids is the reason they go to school. You know, that academics may be frustrating, but sports is fun and you can feel good at it. Uh, and I did a big story on welfare reform, and there was a woman with two boys who had a lot of problems, but they got to high school and they were big and they were on the football team. And the coach said, you guys could get college scholarships. Said, but we have a homework club, and all the football players come and they do their homework. The coach wanted them all to get decent grades so they would remain eligible to play. And because of that, they got decent grades. They wanted to play football. And for some kids, that is the motivator that keeps them on track. So I think sports are great for kids. And as I say, if your kid hates sports, there's a whole bunch of other activities that kids can do that make them feel like, I'm good at something, and it's worth it to go to school. And that teach, I think, real teamwork.
I definitely would. Glad to hear we share some of the same beliefs, because I've seen it with the extracurricular activities, whether you're in band or play or anything else besides sport. Those kids are doing well as well. Folks, I said we are going to do 20 to 40 minutes with Joanne. I do have one last segment. Can I have you for another 10 minutes?
Sure. Why
Okay.
not?
Here's what we're going to do. We talked about AI in schools, technology in schools. We moved to kindergarten and micro schools and charter schools. Let's move into here. You've written several articles about this. I want to kind of put it together so we can wind this up in about 10 minutes. Does college pay for some programs, nursing, engineering, and economics? It does. Not for 31% of it. Folks are opting out of going to college. I think in 2019, you said it was 55% were saying, hey, I'm going to go on. In 2024, last year was 39%. 36% of graduates say college is a waste of time. And then the question is, a lot of young males are opting out of college. I think here at UNC, it's 60% women, 40% men. The question is, what's next for high school grads? If you choose college, so can you kind of go, hey, we talked from kindergarten, let's go up to, hey, I'm getting ready to graduate high school. What am I going to do? And what's it mean for the students? What does it mean for the parents? Again, the other thing you can point out is seeking less employers are seeking workers with degrees. They're seeking more, hey, do you have a Microsoft certification or some kind of technical certification versus a college degree? So how's that all meshing together? What are you seeing happening, and what do you see as the potential down the road in the future?
Well, one of the things that happened is that has been a lot of talk in the Biden administration about forgiving student loans, and people said all these people went to college and now they're in debt and they can't pay it back. Maybe this is not such a good path for me. People became very conscious of the costs of college, and they saw people who went to college and weren't in good jobs, uh, weren't successful. Um, but I think it's pretty much always been true that if you are an excellent student at school, you're a motivated student, you know that you'll go to college and you'll succeed. You'll pass your classes. You'll get that degree. The biggest problem comes from people who go to college, borrow money, but don't finish. And um, so they call them debt but no degree. That's a disaster. Um, Although to be fair, most people who go to college and drop out very quickly. And many people drop out from community college, but they never borrow, they don't owe any money because it's relatively cheap. But to go to a four-year school, borrow money, and not finish, very bad. To go to a four-year school, borrow, and earn a degree in some subjects, not so good. And so there are two things. Will you actually earn the degree? And uh, your high school, it used to be high school was very predictive of college success. Less so because of rampant grade inflation. It used to be if you got A's and B's in high school, you were going to do well in college. Now, a B in high school doesn't necessarily. Some high schools, it means you're a pretty good student. Some high schools, it means you're a nice kid. Maybe you showed up most of the time. So grade inflation has made the high school grades far less predictive, and everybody basically says test scores are the only thing that you can really rely on to predict your success. If you're a weak student, I would say don't go to college. Or go to community college because it's cheap and look for a vocational certificate program that you can complete fairly quickly. Um, Actually, what I really say if you're a weak student and you're in high school is work harder in high school. Improve your skills now. It's free. Take advantage. Don't wait till you have to pay for it to improve your skills. But there's a lot of people getting high school diplomas that are kind of weak in reading and writing and especially weak in math. And they enroll in community college and they fail. So the time to improve is before you get to college. Um, There are students who think they're doing pretty well. They go to a four-year school and they really struggle to pass classes. Maybe they thought they were going to major in, a technical major, but then they say, no, that's not going to work. So they go to a low math major. And low math majors tend not to pay very well. Social work is one of the worst in terms of pay. They want a lot of education, but they don't want to pay you any money. Um, uh, Things like fine arts, theater, terrible. Um, Now maybe you love art and you love theater and this is what you want to do, but I would say if you're going into debt for that degree, understand that you may be burdened by that debt forever. It's really hard to make much money with a fine arts or theater degree. um, Religion is, if you want to be a minister, doesn't pay very well. Uh, and Basically, I would say that the theme is more math, more money. Um, because of AI, people are very worried that a lot of entry level white collar jobs are disappearing, including computer science jobs. So that's AI is happening so quickly. I don't know what to say about it, but um, the jobs that are probably more secure are like plumber. I mean, you probably can't get AI to come in and unclog things. And I think young men in particular who are doing much worse than girls in school on average are looking at the trades. It's like, how do I get into the trades? And everybody's talking about how do we improve the system of helping these kids who really want to be in a skilled trade. They don't want to spend more time in a classroom. um, how do we help them make that transition? So people are talking about it. I see some things happening, but we're really at the very early stages. There's been a lot of talk, not that much action on creating that system.
Let me ask you this question, because I noted this down too, because I actually took notes and I write down my notes. Writing by hand builds reading, writing, and thought process skills. Why is that?
Well, that is an observation, and it may be just the physical. I'm not sure why that is, but I think people who look at this are very convinced that 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 writing by hand is better for learning than typing on a keyboard. I myself find that I do less writing by hand, and it's harder for me to do it. Of course, I'm getting older. I write checks by hand. It's like, oh my God, this is so difficult. And of course, I took notes by hand, you know, in my professional career, and I was good at doing that. But one of the things that teachers and professors have said is that kids aren't developing good motor skills because they do so much on a keyboard. And so again, it's really helpful to do things that use your hands. Um, and and to develop this. I think it's just really helpful to do things in the real physical world, um, rather than doing everything in the virtual world. Um, and um, and then there's a lot of things. I said my daughter has a young child, and so I get to see child rearing in 2025, much more intense than it used to be. People, I think educated parents are, need to relax a little bit. Um, and it's much more, oh, we need to enrich this and we need to enrich that. But sometimes kids just need to go out and play.
So basically, you're saying just let kids be kids, or in the old days, again, sounding like an old guy, go play until the lights turn on the street, and then come back home. So,
Well, I very much grew up. I'm a mid baby boomer, and so there were always just a ton of kids to play with, and uh, I might have used to play in the street because there wasn't much traffic, literally in the street. Uh, but there was a park a block away, and we'd just go to the park and see who was there. Um, and so we learned to our social skills by you know playing with other kids, and you were supposed to be home for dinner, and that was and my uh, I'm the second of four children, and most people came from big families. Um, so our parents couldn't be helicopter parents because they had too many kids. Um, I will say we were 14, 13, and 10 when my surprise brother was born. And so I became a very prized babysitter because I had experience with a baby.
so you had to take care of the oops baby, hey?
Well, I remember thinking, there are girls not much older than me taking care of babies on their own with no money. And here
Right.
I am taking care of him for 4 hours. And I'm like,
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to wrap it up because we're close to 55 minutes, close to 2 o'clock. Folks, glad you joined us. We had a bunch of folks. It looks like we had 150 folks stop by while we're doing this right now. We've got a dozen folks watching. If you want, you can remark in Facebook. Reminder, everybody, Facebook will delete this live stream at the end of 30 days. We will be available on our YouTube channel. And I mentioned to Joanna, I'll put out a summary on our Chatham Journal Facebook page, and then I will put together a short little story. But you know what, folks? You don't have to wait for my short little story, because all you basically have to do, and I'm going to pop this up right here, on the bottom there is joannejacobs.com. Check her out. She actually put up an article this morning about what they're teaching in history classes in Philly, but we're not going to go there because we don't have time to talk about it. But she's putting out a whole bunch of interesting content out there. Don't know if she has a tip jar on her website, but if you want to take a look from a person who's been covering education for a while, I think it's worthwhile following. I appreciate the fact that she let us run one of her permitted us to run one of our columns back in February. And who knows, maybe in the future we'll get to have her back on and talk about what else is happening this year. I hope you found this interesting. Joanne, do you have anything else to say before we close things up?
Not really, but do visit the blog, joannejacobs.com, and leave comments. I would love to have more commenters who are not the same old people.
All
And
right,
you know,
so folks,
I was a newspaper person, and I love to support newspapers.
there you go. And just go ahead and, hey, feel free to leave a comment. I've gone through, and yeah, you do get some comments, but as you said, you don't get as many as you would like. All right, folks, with that, we're going to end the stream. I'm going to keep Miss Joanne on for a minute after we end the stream to give her some additional information. But thanks for